Hello everyone and welcome back to the FPL Phillips YouTube channel, or if it's your first time watching, welcome, and before your attention span absolutely goes within 10 seconds, if you want to see more of my FPL videos, make sure to subscribe. Thought I'd throw that in early, yeah, just because that's what us YouTubers do. Anyway, today I've got the Game Week 7 preview video. I'm going to be answering some queries, questions that you guys have had from me, and the first one we're going to be kicking things off with is, can Van de Ven cover Porro? And more importantly, be a cheaper option for you guys to go for and save that million to spend elsewhere in your side? Well, I think the answer to that, in short, is probably not, but he might do. And yeah, that's a short answer, but here are the stats and the breakdown. Spurs have some very nice fixtures coming up next, we know that. The defence has looked a lot better than previous seasons, in my view, and Van de Ven in particular has looked very, very attacking. We've, of course, kind of got the recency bias of that amazing assist that he pulled off last game week against Manchester United. However, I don't think this is isolated. We've got the stats here per 90, and we can see throughout the season so far, he's been consistently outperforming Porro for expected FPL points per 90, so 5.27 compared to Porro's 4.81. Now, this isn't from XG. Porro is still registering higher in that, 0.06, so 3 times as much XG, in fact, as Van de Ven, but still a relatively small amount nonetheless. The expected assists is where Van de Ven comes through, 0.23 compared to the 0.16. Now, that chance that he created last game week will be, a very, almost close to 1 in terms of XA, and we've only had 6 game weeks so far, so of course when you consider that per 90, it's going to be a little bit inflated. It's still not the biggest sample size in the world. It's not like comparing to an entire season's worth of data, but it's still looking good for him. And he's not too far off on baseline bonus points as well. Porro is a notoriously good player when it comes to his bonus points potential. But Van de Ven on 7.55 for his baseline compared to Porro's 8.04, it's not far off indeed. And I could definitely see if Spurs keep more clean sheets, Van de Ven continuing to pick up some more bonus points. FPL Review, however, do not like Van de Ven as much as myself maybe, and as much as the underlying stats so far this season from Fantasy Football Fix suggest. They've got Porro predicted to score 10.5 points over the next 3 game weeks compared to Van de Ven's 7.9. So, a 2.6 point difference is definitely not insignificant. It's quite a gap, and you could argue $1 million in your FPL budget is maybe worth that right now, with some decent value options emerging in midfield and kind of up front as well. But when you think about the fact that there's potential to get Saka, Palmer, maybe even Haaland all in one team, if going Van de Ven over Porro can save you that $1 million and make the difference if you're on a wild card, or in general you can just see yourself using those funds, but you need a new defender this week, you're between maybe one of these two, then in my view, I quite fancy a punt on Van de Ven. And again, that might be recency bias speaking, but you guys can let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. If you think I'm wrong, I'm more than interested to know and discuss with you down below. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. But there are some cheaper defender options, even cheaper than Van de Ven, that I like the look of too. And those 2 options are Aït-Nouri and Mykolenko. Now, these guys are both below the 4.5 million mark, and in my view, pretty ideal candidates to go for in that 4th defender slot. The one you're not going to start the majority of game weeks, but it's only a tiny little bit more expensive than, baseline 4.0, but it's going to offer you more than just 2 points pretty much when they come off the bench, or they've got at least the potential for that. So Aït-Nouri and Mykolenko, both very attacking assets in previous years of the Premier League, and I think that's going to continue this year. Mykolenko is one who's had an injury and is only really just coming back into the Everton side, so it's hard to judge his data from what we've seen so far this season. But I still like the look of him. He's always that 0.1 million cheaper than Aït-Nouri. If that makes the difference for you as well, then that could be a factor. And there's also something to do with fixtures and something to be said for that. Whereas, Wolves have Man City coming up in a game week. That same game week, Everton play Ipswich. So use your planning tool of choice. Make sure you're looking at fixtures. You're looking at the rest of your defenders, your back 3. If one of them's got a very, very tricky fixture in game week 8, and you could do with someone coming off the bench or rotating in for that game week, then you're going to want to look at maybe Mykolenko over going for Aït-Nouri, because that could be a big factor. However, though, in general for fixtures over these next foreseeable future of the game weeks, up until game week 20 I've done it, Wolves actually have the best underlying fixtures, the best fixtures I should say, defensively out of any team in the Premier League. So they're first ranked for that. Everton are down in 13th. Now that's quite a while away, that's 13 game weeks, but when you're thinking about a defender, in this position where they're on 4th on the bench, you do kind of want to hold them long term, and you don't really want to be using transfers, dare I say, on a defender who's just going to be on the bench the majority of game weeks. So I thought it was important to consider the long term. In terms of expected goal involvement so far, Aït-Nouri way ahead, 0.44 expected goal involvement. So even when you added up Porro's XA and XG from that last slide that we saw, he's nowhere near Aït-Nouri in terms of that per 90 minutes. And expected clean sheets, Wolves have looked a better defence than Everton, despite what has been a much trickier opening few games of the season, in my view. But all in all, even with that being said and done, FPL review once again kind of going against my thoughts, what I'm feeling at the moment. But over the next 3, Mykolenko 8.1 predicted points, 5.7 for Aït-Nouri. Now, that is only over the next 3 game weeks, and as you can see at the top of your screen, the next 3 game weeks for Wolves, you would argue defensively are much more tricky. You've got 2 away games at Brentford and Brighton, who have been scoring goals, and then a home game against Man City. So I can definitely see why Aït-Nouri is not up there at the 7-8 point mark. But Mykolenko has games against Newcastle, Fulham, and Ipswich, 2 of them being at home. That's undoubtedly an easier set of fixtures on paper. But I still think when you consider long term, up until game week 20, Aït-Nouri, if he can stay fit, will be a great option for you in that 4th defender slot. And yeah, I would actually be tempted to start him in games maybe against Southampton at home that you can see Wolves have coming up there. There are games beyond that as well that I would take up the entire screen if I wanted to show you how good Wolves' fixtures are up until that point. But yeah, Aït-Nouri would be the one I'd be going for. So, had a lot of talk about Mykolenko this week. He's a good option too, but I think if you're in that price budget, the 0.1 million probably won't make the difference. Aït-Nouri would be the pick for me. And the final defender that I just wanted to chat about and highlight that you've probably seen in teams if you've watched like wildcard drafts this week, for example, is Van der Berg at Brentford, who is emerged as a 4.0 million option. Now, he's looked pretty good. Brentford have quite a few injuries across their back line, and I imagine will continue to do so. So he's been in and playing, 4.0 million, 2% ownership. Not very good underlying data at all, 0.03 expected goal involvements per 90. But if you're going for a 4.0 million 5th defender pick, then this guy has probably overtaken Greaves at Ipswich as the best value option for me. Brentford has some nice fixtures coming up. In an emergency, you could start him even in game week 9, maybe even this week. There are some games coming up where in an emergency he'd be useful. So Brentford have some nice fixtures. They've not been great for expected goals conceded, as you can see, 16th out of 20 teams. But still, 4.0 million, can't really complain. If you're on a wild card, have him in as your 4.0 million option. Or if there's a player up front that you really want to upgrade this week, and to do so you would have to maybe sacrifice at the back and go down to a 4.0 million player, then Van der Berg is probably your go-to. And now the boringness of the defenders is out of the way. We're into the midfielders, and the main thing, and the only thing really I wanted to discuss in this position this week, has been the budget picks. And there's a player emerged at a certain price point, Brennan Johnson, who I think could be a very good value player. And I wanted to compare him over the last 3 game weeks to some of the other popular options around this price point. Now, I appreciate Rodgers is, 5.2 million, quite a bit cheaper than Brennan Johnson, who's at 6.4. But you could arguably have at least 2 of these players in your side, maybe even 3, especially if you're looking to fund, as I said earlier, a squad with 2 or 3 premiums in, so Haaland, Palmer and Saka. If you really want all 3, I think there's a world in which you can have a budget forward and 3 of these players and create still a very pretty decent front 7 each game week of the season. So yeah, Semenyo hasn't looked great for data over the last 3 game weeks. The fixtures for the different teams, of course, needs to be considered there. When you look over the entire season so far, suddenly Semenyo comes up very much into his own, and someone like a Brennan Johnson drops down a bit, actually. But we have to consider that Son's been out recently. That's what's made Brennan Johnson a bit of a hype train. Son might come back. We don't know. I'm not sure exactly when. But for now, Brennan Johnson seems a nice pick. I would just kind of reiterate that there's the same issue that we had at the start of the season where I was very much backing him. I thought he's going to be a good 6.5 million if he can nail down a spot. He looked good in pre-season. However, it just didn't really come to fruition that he managed to nail down the minutes in the opening game weeks. Now that he has got some minutes, he's had that tap in against Manchester United. He's looked pretty decent. I like the look of Brennan Johnson. I like him as a punty midfielder this week. More of a short-term luxury option if you've got free transfers going and you don't really have too many other fires to put out, then Johnson could be a nice option. However, if you are in that position where you just need a solid midfield pick, I do still think you opt for Semenyo, McNeil or Rodgers. Save that little bit of extra money, open up some more avenues for your future transfers, and bring in someone who could be on penalties as well in the form of Semenyo, potentially. But in general, are just more consistent players for minutes, because that's a big factor as well. When you sort by game instead of per 90, Johnson drops down as well, just because he's quite prone to a sub when Spurs have players fit and available, or he might even start on the bench some weeks and come on in that way. So yeah, per 90, he's good. It's just the minutes risk, whereas someone like a Semenyo will get 90. We've seen McNeil grab 2 goals last game. Maybe Everton can build on that and find some form with their upcoming fixtures, which don't look too shabby. And Rodgers, he's up against Manchester United this week, who are capitulating at the moment, really. Just seem to be on the verge of maybe turning on another manager, getting him sacked. We've seen some big score lines going against Manchester United when that has happened in previous years. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ollie Watkins and Rodgers go and spank Manchester United this weekend. So even though it might seem like a boring one, everyone's got him. I think don't sleep on Villa assets for this game week at all. And on that same note, I wanted to compare one particular forward who I've seen a lot of interest around, Dominic Solanke, who I would definitely be in the market for as well if I had the luxury option of being able to change my front line this game week. I think Solanke looks like a great pick, so I wanted to weigh him up against someone of kind of a similar player mould and maybe similar value in some sense. I know there's a 1.4 million difference between the two of them. However, I do think that Solanke and Watkins are a good duo to compare against each other. They've got similar roles within their teams, with Watkins probably on penalties, whereas Solanke, I expect, isn't when Son's in the team. Maybe he is when Son is out of the team, so we'll have to see about that. But for now, the fixtures look pretty good for Spurs, as you can see, whereas Villa's fixture run becomes a little bit tricky. You could argue some of the games coming up, even the United one, is not a tricky fixture, but Tottenham and Liverpool, when the two teams face each other in Tottenham and Villa, you'd imagine that Spurs will do quite well there. Liverpool is undoubtedly a difficult game in that sense, but we have seen Villa do very well at home against Liverpool in the past. When it comes to expected FPL points, we've got Ollie Watkins leading the way by quite some margin, 8.30 expected FPL points per 90 compared to Dominic Solanke, who's around about that 6 mark. I think a lot of that will be to do with those first few opening game weeks where we saw Ollie Watkins miss a whole host of chances. And I think that Watkins has just kind of become to put away the chances that he should have been putting away then. And he's been an asset who should have been consistent all the way through. Now he has found some goals. He's scored braces recently, scored 1 goal. So I think Ollie Watkins is still a great option to own. And I know he's an expensive price point, and where I was raving about 3 premium squads earlier, he eliminates that potential really if you go with a Watkins in your side. However, I still really like the look of him. The problem is fitting him in alongside Dominic Solanke, who has undoubtedly a better fixture, and as you can see, until game week 20, second Spurs rank out of the 20 sides for attacking fixture difficulty, whereas Aston Villa are down in 9th, so around the mid-table mark. Still not a bad set of fixtures, but if you want to jump on and capitalise up until maybe your second wildcard, then Solanke could definitely be a pretty long-term hold for you. I think where we'll see Solanke struggle is in games where maybe they're playing a back 5, the opposition against Spurs, very much like we saw in game week 1. Admittedly, Solanke was very new into the Spurs system then, and he had to find time to gel with his new teammates, etc. But I think that we will still see Solanke maybe struggle in games like that, and we'll see players like Kulusevski and Brennan Johnson, who we talked about earlier, actually come into their own a bit more in fixtures like that. So the XG is still pretty close per 90. Watkins on 1.04, so Solanke on 0.93 is not too far behind when you consider all those chances we saw Watkins having earlier in the season. As I said, Solanke not being too far behind is rather significant. But Watkins does have more of an assist threat, so 0.23 compared to Solanke, who's pretty much got none. So when you consider that it's 3 points for an assist for a forward and 4 points for a goal, so even though bonus does does go in favour of strikers who score more goals, assists are only 1 point less than a goal when it comes to attacking returns. So that can make the difference in an asset being better than the other, in my experience playing FPL. And then FPL Review have the two very tight, 14.5 predicted points over the next 3 for Watkins, Solanke on 13.4. So I would really love to own both of these guys, to be honest, in my team. If you can somehow find a world where you maybe just go for the one premium midfielder in a Saka or Palmer, and then you have 3 other budget options in your starting 4 every week, maybe a Tyler Dibbling comes in as your 5th midfield pick, and then you could even somehow find a way to have a front line of Haaland, Watkins and Solanke. That looks pretty tasty indeed. And I think the budget striking options are looking okay. There are some picks there that I do like the look of. Chris Wood still looks good. The Brighton forwards have kind of fallen off, but then you've got options like Evan Nilsson maybe even, who could be a nice cheap punt. When you consider there's quite a big price difference there, you just have to weigh that up. There's maybe 3 million difference between some of those forward options and an Ollie Watkins, whereas in midfield, you know, you're finding big price differences there as well. So it's all about balancing your budget, as it always has been in FPL. That's what it is a game about, finding value in players in the Premier League. But yeah, in my experience, or in my thought process, I think that Ollie Watkins is still going to be a great asset. It's just whether maybe that 1.4 million can be better spent on Solanke, who will come into his own in these fixtures, and you can use that money to find that extra additional player in your midfield that may be a slightly more expensive price point. So yeah, I like the look of both these guys. I think they're both going to be great assets. I just wanted to use this to compare Solanke to someone really, but I still think Watkins is good, and I wouldn't be selling Watkins to get to Solanke, I think would be my point, unless it allowed you to make a very nice upgrade somewhere else in your side, where maybe you need a starting defender, for example, and you need to bring in someone who's more expensive than a 4.0 per se. So yeah, I'll stop waffling now. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you've made it all the way to this video, then kudos to you, because that was probably a struggle. Leave a thumbs up on it if you did enjoy. That would be much appreciated. And until the next one, hopefully I'll catch you there. Goodbye.